I want to read to you now from a book called The American Claimant. What is so different about The American Claimant? It's different than any other book, than any author has ever written. You remember? You're supposed to know that, George. I'll tell you what it is. There is no weather to be found in this book. This is an attempt to pull off a book without any weather. It being the first attempt of the kind in fictitious literature, it may prove a failure, but it seemed worth the while of some daredevil person to try it, and the author was just in the mood. Many a reader who wanted to read a tale through was not able to do it because of delays on account of the weather. Nothing breaks up an author's progress by having to stop every few pages to fuss up about the weather. Thus, it is plain that these persistent intrusions are bad for both reader and author. The reader, it seemed wisest, though, to include some weather for those who need it. So the reader will find over in the back part of the book, out of the way, in Appendix 1, weather. Some of the best weather in literature. From Felicia by Fannie N.D. Murphy. The quick coming winter twilight was already at hand. Snow was again falling, sifting delicately down, incidentally, as it were. This is from People's Country by Charles Egbert Craddock. Away up the gorge, all diurnal fancies trooped into the wide liberties of endless, luminous vistas of azure sunlit mountains beneath the shining azure heavens. The sky, looking down in deep blue placidity, only here and there smoked the water to azure emulations of its tint. 3 azures. And my favorite, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Oh, I thought I'd lost these. Boarding house burns to ground. Arson suspected. Newspaper publisher found strangled. Confidence man swindles poor orphans out of their last cow. I had forgotten now I remember, it all comes back to me. This was part of a carnival of crime in Connecticut. Criminal activity that went unsolved for some time. No one could solve this mystery. Tonight, I will reveal the secret. I will tell you the facts concerning the recent carnival of crime in Connecticut. I was feeling blithe, almost jocund. I put a match to my cigar when just then the morning's mail was handed in. And the first superscription that I glanced at was in a handwriting that sent a thrill of pleasure through and through me. It was my Aunt Mary's. And she was the person I loved and honored most in all of the world outside of my own family. She had been my boyhood's idol. Even maturity, which is lethal to so many fascinating, had failed to dislodge her from her pedestal. As an example of how strong her influence over me was, I will remark that long after everybody else's "please do stop smoking" had ceased to affect me in the slightest degree, my Aunt Mary could still sometimes stir my torpid conscience into faint signs of life when she touched upon the matter. But happily, all things have their limits in this world. I easily guessed what the letter contained. She was coming to see me, but she was coming this very day, and coming by the morning train. I might expect her at any moment. I said to myself, I am thoroughly happy and content now. If my most pitiless enemy could appear before me at this moment, I would freely right any wrong I may have done him. Straightway the door opened, and a shriveled, shabby dwarf entered. He was not more than 2 feet high, and every inch of him and every feature was slightly distorted, slightly out of shape. But there was a fox-like cunning in the eyes and the sharp little face. Also alertness and malice. One thing about him struck me forcefully and most unpleasantly. He was covered all over with a fuzzy, greenish mold, such as one sometimes sees on mildewed bread. The sight of it was nauseating. And yet, this vile bit of human rubbish seemed to bear a sort of remote and ill-defined resemblance to me. It was dully perceptible in the mien, form, the countenance, and even the clothes, gestures, manners, and attitudes of the creature. He was a dim suggestion of a burlesque upon me, a caricature of me in little. He stepped along in with a chipper air, flung himself into a doll's chair without waiting to be asked, tossed his hat into the wastebasket, picked up my old chalk pipe from the floor, gave the stem a wipe or two on his knee, filled the bowl from the tobacco box at his side, turned to me and said in a tone of pert command, "Give me a match." I wanted to kick the pygmy into the fire. But some incomprehensible sense of being legally and legitimately under his authority compelled me to obey his order. He applied the match to the pipe, took a contemplative whiff or two, and remarked in an irritatingly familiar way, "Seems to me it's devilish odd weather we're having for this time of year." I said, "Look here, you miserable little ashcat. You'll have to give a little more attention to your manners, or I'm going to throw you out the window." Come, go gently now. Don't put on too many airs with your betters." This cool snub rasped me all over, but it also subjugated me too for a moment. And then he said, in a peculiarly sneering way, "You turned a tramp away from your door this morning." I said, "Maybe I did, and maybe I didn't. How would you know?" "Well, it isn't any matter how I know, but I know." "Very well, suppose I did turn a tramp away from my door this morning. What of it?" "Oh, nothing. Nothing in particular. Only you lied to him." "This is baseless impertinence." I said to the tramp, "There, wait a bit. I know what you said to him. You told him the cook was going downtown and there was no food left from breakfast." "Two lies. You knew very well the cook was right behind the door and plenty of provisions behind her." Of course, he could have culled the conversation from the tramp, but how had he contrived to find out about the concealed cook? And it was rather mean of you, rather pathetic, rather pitiful of you to refuse to read that poor young woman's manuscript the other day and give her your opinion as to its literary value. And she had traveled so far, too, and so hopefully. Now, wasn't it? Look here, have you nothing better to do than to prowl around prying into other people's personal affairs? Did that girl tell you that? Never mind whether she did or not. The main thing is you did that contemptible thing, and you felt ashamed of it afterwards. You saw the joy go out of her eyes and the tears come there, And you felt so ashamed. Oh, you feel ashamed of it now. Oh, peace, peace, peace. Blister your merciless tongue. Haven't these thoughts tortured me enough already without your coming here to bring them back again? But the dwarf went on and on and on, recalling to my mind, item by item, wrongs, unkindnesses I had committed, humiliations I had put upon friends since dead, and friends who died thinking about those injuries probably and grieving over them. Take the case of your younger brother, for instance, when you two were boys together many and many a long year ago. He always lovingly trusted in you with a fidelity that your manifold treacheries were never able to shake. He followed you about like a dog, content to suffer wrong and abuse if he might only be with you, patient under all these injuries, so long as it was your hand that inflicted them. The last picture you have of him in health and strength must be such a comfort to you. You pledged him your honor, that if he would let you blindfold him, no harm would come to him. And then you led him to a brook thinly glazed with ice, and you shoved him in, and how you did laugh. Man, you will never forget the gentle, reproachful look he gave you as he struggled shivering out. If you live 1,000 years. Oh, you see it now! You see it now, beast! I have seen it 1,000,000 times, and I shall see it 1,000,000 times more, and may you run away piecemeal and suffer till doomsday what I suffer now for bringing it back to me again. 2 months ago, on a Tuesday, I think it was, you awoke away in the night, and you fell to thinking with shame about a peculiarly mean and pathetic act of yours toward a poor, ignorant Indian in the wilds of the Rocky Mountains in the bitter winter of 1800. And stop a moment, devil, stop! You mean to tell me that even my very thoughts are not hidden from you? It appears to look that way, don't it? Didn't you think the things I just mentioned? If I didn't, I wish I may never breathe again. Look here, you. Look me in the eye. Who are you? Well, who do you think? I think you are the devil. I think you are Satan himself. No. Well, then who are you? Would you really like to know? Indeed, I would. Very well. I am your conscience. My Many and many's the restless nights I've wished you could be tangible and that I could get my hands on your throat just once. Oh, but I will wreak a deadly vengeance! Folly. Lightning does not move more quickly than my conscience did. He darted aloft so suddenly that in the instant my fingers clutched the empty air, he was already perched atop the high bookcase with his thumb at his nose in token of derision. Ha, ha, ha! My good slave, you are curiously witless. No, I mean characteristically so. In truth, you are always consistent, always yourself, always an ass. Otherwise, it must have occurred to you that if you had attempted this murder with a sad heart and a heavy conscience, I should have weighed a ton and could not have budged from the floor. Instead, you are so cheerfully anxious to kill me, your conscience is as light as a feather, hence I am away up here and out of your reach. I can almost respect a mere ordinary sort of a fool, but you, pah! I could only glare up at my master and curse the ill luck that denied me a heavy conscience, the one only time I ever wanted such a thing in my life. I said, did anybody see you come in here? I'm invisible to all but you. Oh, uh-huh. Why were you never visible to me before? You never asked me before. You asked, in the right spirit, for your most pitiless enemy. I was that person by a very large majority. How long will you be visible to me? Always. Always? This is an outrage. You have dogged and dogged and dogged me all the days of my life, invisible. And now to have such a thing as you trailing after me the rest of my life? There was never a happier conscience in the universe than I was when you made me visible to you. It gives me an inconceivable advantage. Now I can look you straight in the eyes and leer at you and jeer at you and sneer at you. And you know what eloquence there is in visible gesture and expression, all the more so when the effect is heightened by audible speech. And henceforth I shall always address you in your own sniveling drawl, baby. Many and many's the restless nights I've wanted to take you by the neck. If I could only get my hands on you now. Yes, yes, no doubt, no doubt. But I am not an ass. I am only the saddle of an ass. But go on, go on. You entertain me more than I like to confess. Just here, there was an eager footstep on the stair. I opened the door, and my Aunt Mary burst into the room. It was a joyful meeting and a cheery bombardment of questions and answers concerning family matters ensued. But by and by my aunt said, I am going to have to abuse you a little, nephew. You promised me the day I saw you last that you would look to the needs of that poor family around the corner, just as faithfully as I had done it myself. Well, I have learned, quite by accident, that you have failed of your promise. Was that so? In simple truth, I never thought of that family a second time. And now such a splintering pang of guilt shot through me. I glanced up at my conscience. Plainly, my heavy heart was affecting him. He was drooping forward. He seemed about to fall from his high perch. My aunt continued, and since you never once went to see my poor protege at the almshouse, you dear, hard-hearted promise breaker, perhaps it will not distress you to learn that that poor girl died months ago, utterly friendless and forsaken. My conscience could no longer bear up under the weight of my sufferings, but tumbled headlong from his high perch and struck the floor with a leaden thump. In a fever of expectancy, I sprang to the door, locked it, placed my back against it, and set a watchful gaze upon my struggling master. Already my fingers were itching to begin their murderous work. My aunt cried, "What can be the matter? Why do you stare so? Why do you work your fingers like that? You frighten me. Look elsewhere, woman. Pay no attention to me. It'll pass in a moment. I'm often this way. It comes from smoking too much." My injured lord was up, wild-eyed with terror, trying to struggle toward my door. My aunt cried, "Oh, I knew it would come to this at last. You must crush out that fatal habit while there is yet time." And my conscience reeled again, and then drooped languidly to the floor, blinking toward me one last supplication for mercy with heavy eyes. With an exultant shout, I sprang past my aunt, and in an instant, I had my lifelong foe by the neck. After so many years of waiting and longing, it was mine at last. I tore him to shreds and fragments. I rent the fragments into bits. I tossed the bleeding rubbish into the fire and drew into my nostrils the grateful incense of my burnt offering. At last and forever, my conscience was dead. I turned on my poor aunt, who was petrified with terror, and shouted, "Out of this with your paupers, your charities, your morals, your pestilent reforms. You behold before you a man whose life conflict is done, a man whose soul is at peace, a man whose heart is dead to sorrow, dead to remorse, dead to despair, a man without a conscience. In my joy I spare you, though I could throttle you and never feel a pang. Fly!" She flew. Since that day, my life is bliss. Pure, unalloyed bliss. Nothing in the world could ever persuade me to have a conscience again. I settled all my old outstanding scores, and I began life anew. I killed 34 persons during the first 2 weeks. I burned down a dwelling that interrupted my view. I swindled a widow and an orphan out of their last cow. Very good cow, not thoroughbred. I committed scores of crimes of every kind, and I enjoyed my work tremendously. Whereas in my earlier days, it probably would have turned my hair gray. Oh, and by way of advertisement, medical colleges requiring various assorted tramps for scientific inquiry, either by the cord, by the gross, or per ton, will do well to examine the lot in my cellar before purchasing elsewhere. Because these were all selected and prepared by yours truly, and can be had at a cheap rate now. I'm getting ready for the Christmas tree. There, I suppose that answers any remaining questions that might exist concerning the recent Carnival of Crime in Connecticut.